Silver Lake Meadows, nestled in the suburban outskirts of Evansville, had long been a beacon for families seeking peace and order. With its tree-lined streets, manicured lawns, and postcard-worthy homes, the community looked like the American dream personified. But behind that picture-perfect facade, power and paranoia simmered just beneath the surface. The Homeowners Association, an entity with more reach than the city council in these parts, held strict dominion over all things domestic. From mailbox heights to lawn ornament dimensions, nothing escaped scrutiny. At the helm of this miniature regime stood Judith Warren, the HOA's treasurer. Neighbors didn't call her Judith behind closed doors. They called her Karen, and they whispered it with a blend of fear and contempt. Judith was the embodiment of HOA absolutism. Her shoulder-length auburn hair framed a face that rarely smiled unless she was issuing a warning notice. Her beige pantsuits and clipboard were familiar sights, symbols of a power she wielded with fervor. Her home, her SUV, even her front flower beds exuded meticulous perfection, all of it a projection of control she needed to maintain. Into this environment arrived Matthew and Rachel Duncan, a newly married couple who had grown up in more relaxed neighborhoods where people knew each other by name, not by the violations on their record. They bought a quaint home on Willowbend Lane, charmed by the lake views and the promise of community. The first week went smoothly. Friendly neighbors welcomed them with cookies and cautious smiles. More than one offered unsolicited advice. Just follow the rules and keep your head down. And for the love of peace, don't challenge Judith. Matthew laughed it off until he met her. It was a Saturday morning. He was installing a bird feeder when Judith's white SUV screeched to a halt at the curb. "Matthew Duncan? I'm Judith Warren, treasurer of the HOA," she announced before he could speak. Matthew extended a hand. "Nice to meet you, Judith. My wife Rachel and I just moved in." She ignored the handshake and pointed at the feeder. "That may be a violation. Check Section 5.2 of the guidelines. Ornament dimensions must conform to aesthetic standards. If it's over 2 feet tall or wider than 9 inches, you'll receive a warning." Rachel appeared on the porch, smiling graciously. "We're happy to follow the rules," she said, though her voice revealed a note of incredulity. Judith's face barely softened. "Good. This community functions because we hold the line." She turned, strode back to her SUV, and drove away without another word. The Duncans exchanged looks. They understood now. The warnings had not been exaggerated. Over the next few months, the Duncans tried to blend in. Matthew volunteered for neighborhood patrol. Rachel attended book clubs. They threw a small barbecue, inviting neighbors to foster a sense of connection. Most appreciated it. Judith did not. She arrived at their doorstep 2 days later demanding meeting minutes and a usage request form for the park benches they'd used. Rachel's patience wore thin. "It was a social gathering," she said. "We didn't reserve any community property. Just invited friends to our backyard." Backyard or not, events that impact common resources require documentation. Judith snapped, handing over a printed link to the HOA site. "Next time, file it properly." By then, others had started to question her rule. One of them was George Tucker, a retired electrician who lived near the lake. When his basement flooded due to faulty irrigation runoff, he demanded the HOA address it. Judith dismissed him. "Maintenance priorities are determined by the board," she said at a meeting. "So my $3,000 in water damage isn't a priority?" he asked. "We can't shift budgets for isolated issues," she replied. It wasn't isolated. Others had water damage too. But Judith dismissed every complaint as whining. The tension escalated. Residents spoke in hushed tones about recalling Judith. She retaliated by tightening control, sending out warning letters for minor transgressions. Trash bins out of place. Lights too bright. Flags not registered. Her iron grip only galvanized opposition. Then tragedy struck. Elliot Pierce, a 68-year-old retired paramedic, lived across from the Duncans. He'd kept mostly to himself, but was beloved for his gentle nature. One late evening, he collapsed from a cardiac episode and managed to call 911 before losing consciousness. An ambulance arrived within 10 minutes, but the gate was locked. The code emergency services was outdated. Judith had changed it without notifying the fire department. Dispatch tried calling the HOA's emergency contact line, but were redirected to an outsourced service that couldn't help without verifying identity. Judith arrived moments later, furious that flashing lights disturbed the calm. She interrogated the paramedics, demanded ID, questioned their authority. Every second cost Elliot time. By the time the gates were opened, he had stopped breathing. The medics tried everything. He was rushed to the hospital, but it was too late. Elliot was pronounced dead just after midnight. The community was devastated and enraged. Elliot had saved lives for decades, yet died waiting at a gate because of red tape. Judith insisted she did nothing wrong. Protocols exist for a reason, she told a local news crew. They had the wrong code. That's not my fault. But the neighborhood had had enough. Rachel Duncan led a petition to remove Judith from the board. George Tucker held a town hall in his garage. More than half the residents signed. Local news picked up the story. The Duncans, Patricia O'Reilly, and other longtime residents gave statements. Judith's emails, some shockingly callous, were leaked. The HOA board, now under public scrutiny, convened a special session. President Harold McBride, once Judith's staunchest ally, turned against her. "This is no longer about a gate," he said. "This is about a culture of intimidation that has endangered lives." Judith was removed from the board by unanimous vote. Elliot's daughter filed a wrongful death suit. Evidence mounted. Emails showing emergency services had requested updated codes repeatedly and were ignored. The court ruled in favor of the family. Judith was personally liable for damages exceeding $1.5 million. Worse, the district attorney filed criminal charges. At trial, jurors heard paramedics describe Judith's interrogation. Experts testified about how each lost minute reduced Elliot's survival chances. Internal communications showed she prioritized property values over people. Judith was convicted of criminal negligence. She was sentenced to 6 years in prison and lost her home, which was auctioned to pay restitution. Silver Lake Meadows reformed. New board members were elected, including Rachel and George. Emergency protocols were overhauled. Gate codes were shared with police and EMTs. Maintenance priorities shifted to infrastructure over aesthetics. A bronze plaque now stands in the neighborhood park, in memory of Elliot Pierce, a neighbor, a hero, a victim of our own complacency. Judith Warren became a cautionary tale, a reminder that when rules become more important than people, tragedy is inevitable. And in the quiet streets of Silver Lake Meadows, the wind no longer carried the weight of whispered warnings, but the promise of change forged through pain, and the commitment that such a mistake would never happen again. Rachel and Matthew Duncan never forgot the lesson their community learned. They remained active in the HOA, but with compassion at the core. Rachel launched a quarterly newsletter sharing updates, wellness tips, and emergency procedures. George, now in his 70s, led monthly community safety meetings. 5 years later, Silver Lake Meadows was featured in a state journal for transforming from one of the most complaint-ridden HOAs into a model for transparency and resident care. The article's headline read, "From Control to Community, the Silver Lake Turnaround." During a spring community picnic, a young couple approached Rachel and Matthew. They were expecting their first child and had just moved in. Nervous, they asked about the HOA. Rachel smiled. "We've had our rough patches, but you're safe here now. We remember what went wrong, and we make sure it never happens again." At that, a siren echoed faintly from the distance. The new gate, fitted with EMS-triggered auto-openers, glided wide open, without delay. And in that small, seamless moment, the legacy of loss gave way to a future of care.